Okay, so good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. There may be some folks joining us in a few minutes as well, but we'll get started just so that we can maximize our time. We're shooting for no more than an hour and a half tonight, just because it's late out on the East Coast, and some of us haven't had supper yet either. So, and it's getting close to supper time, I guess, out west too, depending on how old you are. So. So let's start with a word of prayer. God of love and grace, thank you for this opportunity to be together. Thank you for all of the folks across Canada who have expressed interest in getting together to talk about what comes next for your church here. We ask, God, that you would infuse within us a spirit of creativity and collegiality, that you would open us up to new ways of thinking and being, to have courageous conversations, and to listen to deeply and intently to one another. Help us to be open to wherever the conversation might lead, and to be receptive to where you are speaking to us, so that we might know where you call us and where you're sending us next. Amen. So welcome, everybody. Let's let Anne get in here.
Now, before we get started, can I ask a question? As you see in my name, I'm actually not from Canada. I am from the United States.
Yes.
I am from the Pacific Southwest region, which includes Southern California, Nevada, and all of Hawaii. So, and I'm a lay person. So during your study session, I got involved in this team. So I'm very interested in seeing how things develop, what I can learn, but if I'm the wrong person in the group, please let me know.
No, you're totally welcome here. And I saw your name there, Lorenz, and I should have said, across the continent, but I was thinking specifically about Canada. But honestly, sure. I think that whatever it is that we talk about really is a conversation for the church in general. So yes, perfect. Your voice is 100% welcome here as well. So don't be shy.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. So we have 15 folks here tonight. Thank you so much for coming out. I just wanted, before we launch into things, I just want to give you a quick sort of idea about what this is. So for the last year, so I was on sabbatical last year at this time. Actually today was the day I just came back from Mexico, and I still had another month to get things, to figure things out before I went back to work. And my biggest concern was, how do I take this sabbatical time after I haven't had to hop on and off of planes and be in different places every other day? How do I now reintegrate into that busy travel schedule again after being off for 3 months? Little did I know that in a short week's time, everything would shut down and I wouldn't be on another plane again for a year, at least. Well, so far, a year. So over that time, one of the things that really was on my mind during my sabbatical was, how do I take the learning that's coming to me in this time and looking at the sort of changing face of the church across North America? What is it that God is calling us to? How can we have, brave conversations, courageous conversations about being a different kind of church than what perhaps we've experienced before? One of the challenges over the last year, though, is that I haven't known how to say this or how to approach it, because there's been so many changes, and everything that we've known is turned upside down. So a lot of the things that I originally wanted to explore and discuss with the church actually are not as relevant now as they were before the pandemic hit. So that being said, it's finally, I love it when the universe started finally, all the pieces drop onto the table and you don't know how to put them together yet, but they're all there. You know that at least most of them are there. So it kind of occurred to me over the last year of listening to the congregations and listening to pastors and listening to lay people, is that there are some substantial issues for us to kind of work through together as a church. Everything from mental health of our leaders and the people in the pews, to rising conflict across the life of the church, just congregations and people who are not sure now what to do. How do we integrate and be both online and in person Can we go back to what we used to be? Should we go back to what we used to be? And what is it that is actually, what does it actually mean to be the church now in this mid-pandemic, post-Christendom, post-denominational, post-postmodern, whatever you want to call it, sort of atmosphere? So I think it's a timely conversation for us, and it's not just going to be me here expounding all these wonderful thoughts. That's dangerous and probably a waste of all of our time. So, but what I really hope will happen out of this, not only just tonight, but in the next, let's say, 4 weeks to start, and then we'll see if we can continue, if it should continue, but actually do something called a group think. So what is it that, like, what are the questions that we come up with together around where are the areas within the life of the church that we need to focus and problem solve or troubleshoot or address? But also then, what is working in your area, or what are you experiencing, or what is it that you're reading from folks that are also studying this question and looking at the life of the church, so that we can actually put all our brains and our hearts together. Not just the knowledge and information, but also what is Spirit saying to you? And what are you experiencing in your corner of the vineyard that would be relevant and helpful as we sort of struggle to figure out what is it that the church is to be right now? I'm not so worried about what's coming up in the future, because that's totally uncertain. But what is it that we're being called to right now? And how can we love and support each other and work through some of the issues that are facing us right now? So we are a big group at 15. So we may, when we get into some of the discussion, we may just drop into, if we have time tonight, into small groups, just so that we can have a quicker conversation, a little bit more fruitful conversation, and come into the whole again, probably just to 2 groups. But before we do that, I wonder if we can take really no more than 3 minutes to introduce yourself, say where it is that what your name is, where it is that you're from, if you're serving somewhere or attending in a congregation somewhere here in Canada, the US, where that congregation is. And then one thing that's sort of a question that's on your heart, or a thought when you think about what comes next, what is it that you are thinking of? And if we can keep it really super brief, because there are a lot of us, then that would be helpful. And then at the end of your little spiel, if you can pass it off to somebody, to volunteer somebody to take the next introduction, that would be great. Okay. So I'm going to pass it off to Jane Picard. Yeah, Jane.
Okay, I can do this. The glasses are, let's try different ones because they're glaring terribly. That's a little better. Hi, I'm Jane Picard. I live in Brampton, which is a suburb of Toronto in Ontario. We are, tomorrow, we are going to still be in gray, but non-essential stores will be able to open. So we'll be wondering to see how that all goes. What else you wanted to know? Oh, I serve as a pastoral counselor, retired, semi-retired, and I work through an Anglican church focusing on children's ministries, family ministry really. And a question is, especially with COVID and online services and everything, how much are we investing in a building that could be better invested somewhere else? Oh, passing it on. I don't know if this is your name, but on your frame it says Dwayne.
Dwan. I'm from Edmonton, married to Ed, and
Sorry.
we are kind of in the middle, I guess we would call it a church plant right now, because we sold everything and starting anew in the middle of a pandemic. So I guess for the future, I'm a little bit terrified what's going to happen. Yeah. And I'll pass it on to Awit.
Thank you, Duan. My name is Awit Marcelino. I'm the pastor of Sugar Bush Christian Church in Guelph, Ontario, which is now all on Zoom, just like many of you. So we're based out of Zoom, and I grew up in the Broadway Disciples United Church / Home Street Christian Church out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. We're supposed to add a question, right? A question about this time. We're kind of in the same spot as McKernan. We don't have a physical location. We've been renting this whole time. And so I think part of it is how do we stay connected to the local community when everything is up in the air and in Zoom? How can we still be of service to the community where the church is based? I'm going to pass it off to Mike.
I'm Mike Prosnick, and I'm serving at West Gore as a student minister, and trying to think of a good thing. We've experienced growth during the pandemic by going online and having people that have left our community join back in, or people who have a touch back to the community join us online. And so we've gone back in person and kept our online happening as well, which meant in our rural community getting internet in the church, which is a great step forward. And so our plan hopefully is to do online and on site. And then in the winter, if it's bad, we just do online. Like, this has been good for us in that way. But I'm interested in what community means now that we have, a couple from Qatar, a family in Manitoba, and a family in Ontario joining us, and they physically can't touch in, but they come into our Bible study, our Sunday morning, they're giving, so they're really engaged. And so there's this new idea of what is community, and how many more, and for people in the Maritimes, we export a lot of people. So this is kind of a neat revelation in the sense, not in a big R sense, but an insight that maybe some of the people that have left can now come back into things like church in their community because they can do this online. So I think that's a great opportunity, but I'm interested in what people think about community. And then the second question I have that's been noodling around in my head lately is there's got to be more to community life than just a Sunday morning service. And so California, this morning I found an article on basic income experiments that happened in California. And I talked about the Sunday morning service being a spiritual basic income. And so you come on Sunday, but there's got to be something so much more. And so what does that look like in the pandemic, and just be even without the pandemic? And so if anybody is doing stuff like, and maybe not just the traditional stuff like Bible study or that kind of thing, or helping, we do a lot of community stuff. But I guess what I'm trying to think about, if anybody has any experience with the new monasticism, I don't know what that looks like, how you connect these dots. So that's a bunch of dots. I'm just throwing them out there. And I'll pass it off to Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn. I go to Windholm Christian Church in Dartmouth. We have in the last few years recently sold our building, so we are in rented space. And our congregation is dwindling fast and furiously. I'm one of the younger people, and trust me, I am not that young. We have very few children, and I miss that terribly. We do 2 churches, two online and then 2 in person. And David and I chose today to actually go to a Baptist church that had 27 kids. It was a really nice deal. I really enjoyed it, right? Instead of doing the Zoom thing online. I don't know where we go from here. I don't think the church will ever die. I have great faith that it will not. But how it will change, I don't know. Anyway, and I will pass it on to Noel.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm Noel Suministrado, the current minister at Broadway Disciples United Church here in Winnipeg. And although there's this possibility of an in-person meeting, but we have not done yet. And just today, the signboard in the church says March 8th. So tomorrow would be the first anniversary of our church of not being able to meet. So that's a marker. I think a lot of us are trying to look back at the kind of normalcy, which is not, possible nor available. And these are some of the questions that is, swirling at the back of my head. But then again, the church is like the virus too, pretty adaptive, and it mutates. Christianity is a good, it's like a virus. It's really great at mutating. So I'm pretty sure it will, we'll get into something different. But definitely we cannot go back. That's one thing that I see. Big changes coming, but I'm excited. And I'll pass it to Anne.
I'm Ed from Edmonton. I'm married to Duan, as she mentioned. And we are, as she said, we are in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of trying to figure out what we're doing. Everything's changed. We sold our buildings, moved away, met in a community hall 1 week, and then now we couldn't. And it's kind of evolving from there. So we don't really know exactly what the future is going to look like. We haven't been able to set everything in stone yet, if that ever happens, actually. But I see where Duan says I'm kind of terrified. I'm not terrified. I'm just sometimes apprehensive. I know that we're supposed to be doing this, and that's the thing that keeps us going forward. Is this is what we were supposed to do. And why God threw in the pandemic, I don't know, to kind of, mess that whole plan up. But, that wasn't our plan. So anyway, I guess I'm trying to think, how do you, we've moved to a new community. We'll have a new name, a new meeting place. And how do we, especially now, if we can't get together the same way and everything, how do we manage to reach out and get to know people in the community when you can't really go out and see them and interact with them and things like that. So, that's a thing too, because we haven't really gone beyond ourselves at this point. We're still trying to do all the figuring out of that. So anyway, that's where I am. And I'll pass it off to Mary.
So I'm from Somerville Christian Church, and I'm a lay person. Our church, this is in Nova Scotia, and the numbers have been pretty low here. So we have had church like we normally do, but it's not the same as it was before the pandemic. And so I guess my question is, how are we going to get rid of this fear of, getting together and, being like we were before the pandemic? And I can't actually see other people, so I guess somebody else is just going to have to jump in.
Okay, I can recommend. How about Anne?
Thanks, Jen. Well, I'm Ann Stainton. I'm the moderator for the region. I'm also associate minister at Hillcrest in Toronto. Actually, we're like you, Noel. We haven't worshiped in the building itself in a year, but we have been worshiping online. And as Mike said, we have people from all over who join us on Sundays regularly. And that's going to be the challenge in the future. how do we continue to worship with these folks, as well as with the people who actually live in our area. But I have found that there have been positive things to what's been taking place. The youth have stepped forward to help us with our online worship services and other meetings. Before, they were not very active, but they came forward and said, can we help? And we have been using them a lot. So this is another challenge. If we go back to the church, which I'm sure we will, because there are people waiting to do that, how do we keep these young people, they're young adults now, active, doing what they do best? After our online worship service this morning, our speaker for Good Friday and I had a meeting with some folks who are going to be involved in that meeting, and we're talking about using candles, crosses, and things that we probably would be completely different way to approach it had we been in the building. So there will be a strong focus on these objects and bringing the message of Good Friday forward. So I'm finding that the online services are really positive in one respect. And I'm apprehensive when we go back to the building. I'm sort of the reverse, I guess. I'm a little strange that way. Change doesn't bother me as much as some folks. But anyway, that's the challenge today, is to keep the younger people involved with the church. And what are we going to do when we go back to the building? How are we going to maintain the online presence as well as physical presence? And we haven't really touched or be communicated other than the online services, and that's been very helpful. People actually get to see others that we haven't been able to see in a year. And we're certainly going to have a cleaning bee if it ever opens. There are a lot of cobwebs around. So who hasn't? Shirley, are you on the line? Who else is here? Shirley, I'll pass it off to Shirley.
Okay, can you hear me? Good evening, I'm Shirley Francis. I'm with the Milton Christian Church in Milton, Nova Scotia. I'm a lay person. And looking at our church, we're an older congregation, smaller a congregation. We are holding services, no other activities too much, but we are holding services. And I think what we are looking at, we are not very good at change. We're not very good at embracing technology. But I think what we are looking at is how can we work smarter with fewer volunteers, not to wear out the ones we have, but how can we work smarter? And we are working on that. So, and how are we going to move forward? And I hope too, like Anne, that the technology and our services online will continue, because I think they can reach a number of people, and that's one way of enlarging our congregations, I feel. And I'd like to pass out kudos to Mike and Wes Gore. Actually, I think they're a great example of embracing technology, moving forward, and their services online are wonderful. So we're going to have to follow their example. And I'll pass it on to Jane. She's been on. It's okay. Lorenzo?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. As you know, I have a slight accent. I was actually born and raised in Germany for 27 years, was raised Catholic. Then I met my wife in Germany, but she's from Bakersfield. So we moved in 1986. We moved to Bakersfield, California, which is about a couple of hours north of Los Angeles. Then I joined the First Christian Church Bakersfield, which we then changed our name to Milk Creek Christian Church Bakersfield, because this way we felt connected to a park rather than telling them, oh yeah, we are across the railroad tracks right there. So we associated our name of our church with a park nearby. Anyway, we are in the same boat. Through the pandemic, we closed our church, then we opened up, and we noticed immediately that folk, because we haven't seen each other for 6-8 weeks, the social distancing was a task, was really difficult. Folks just came in, hugged each other, and just was tough to do. Then our restrictions changed to the purple tier, so we said we're going to close down again. So we started online streaming, which in the beginning we had really difficulties. We had issues with our sound, but then the same with Anne, our youth actually stepped up, and they are running our video board now, and it's actually pretty stable and consistent. So that definitely helped. Regarding our church, it's also an older congregation. When I went there in 1986, 87, we had average attendance of probably about 120, 140, depending. Now we are down between 50 and 60. Average age is probably, I would say, 70, 65 to 70. Don't have much youth, don't have many young families, so we are dwindling a little bit too. That also brings another challenge, because we all are used to seeing church as going to church, sitting there, being there as in person. But I think church is changing. You can have a very churchly discussion at Starbucks with some of the younger folk, whatever. Get them together, thinking more of social justice, and probably connect them more. Anyway, so I'm a lay person there. In the meantime, I was asked to be at the commission and ministry for the region, which I've been now for 2 years. I have 1 more year to go. And usually I know they're extending it 3 more years. So it could be a 4 more year commitment. I also am the go-to person for the men's group. PSWR, we had a good men's group. It kind of fell away. Disciple Women kind of bloomed really well, and is a big group. So I'm in the process of hopefully getting more men interested again in being part of a group for PSWR, putting on events where we can help other churches clean up, fixing them up, depending what else needs to be done. So anyway, my kind of groups are, questions are, how do we tell the folk who we are, who the DOC is? Because I think we are definitely a good hidden secret. We are out there, I believe, what people are looking for. We give the freedom to basically believe what fits you. We are open and affirming. We are accepting other ideas. We agree to disagree without being really in each other's hair. So who do we tell? How do we tell other folk what the DOC are, what we are? And then the other one, a little bit, that's probably selfish. And this again, what will be the role of the man be, and man in a larger view now of the DOC. So enough of me now. I appreciate it. I'm not sure Nancy, has Nancy introduced herself yet? If she can hear us.
I'm not sure, Nancy, if you can unmute yourself. Maybe we'll come back to Nancy. Maybe Malaya, would you introduce yourself? And hopefully, oh, there's Nancy.
There
she is.
I'm in the kitchen. I'm in West Gore, Nova Scotia. I'm part of Mike's congregation. And thank you, the man from California. I'm a sort of transplant. I've been in West Gore now for 25 years in this church. My ancestors helped to found it. So of course was always very interested in it. And it's much like all the other ones, few people, all the average age maybe 70, 60, and no children now. And but we're very fortunate to have Mike with us, and looking forward to when he finishes his studies, because if anybody's going to be able to get the young interested again, I think he's going to be a very good leader in that department. And so I'm excited to be here and still alive to see what happens. And so I don't have a lot of questions. I'm interested in listening to the rest of you, but I will certainly hope to be able to lend something to this local scene here. And I can't tell who I might pass it on to. I can't see who it would be.
Okay, I can do that for you, Nancy.
Fine.
I just want to welcome Terry, who's just joined us. And Terry, we're just taking 3 minutes each to go around the table and introduce ourselves, say where we are, where we're serving, what congregation we're associated with, and then maybe a question that might be on your mind as far as the kind of the now and the future of the church. So, but I'll pass it over to Malaya.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Malaya, and I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I belong to Pastor Noel's church, Broadway Disciples United Church, or BDUC. There's also an acronym about belly dancers with BDUC, so not to be confused with the belly dancers. Let's not go there. But anyway, the questions that I have aren't fully articulated yet. They're mostly themes about church unity, congregational healing, and where we go from here. So I really gravitated to Pastor Jen's title of the next 4 weeks, and I thought that it would be great to meet all of you and to have discussions with you.
We could pass it over maybe to Terry. Are you okay to introduce yourself?
I am. Hi. Time got away from me today, so I'm actually trying to cook some fish that was due and settle my dog down who wants some of the fish. So I'm Terry Tribe. I live in London, Ontario. Gosh, I was ordained in the Ridgetown Church in 1989, so that'll give some of my age away, and served as a hospital chaplain for a number of years in Kingston as a multi-faith chaplain. And then ended up serving at Winger Church in the Niagara region for a number of years, and then went to the States for a number of years, and most recently worked with hospice, and then finally got back to Canada, to Windsor, and served as a hospital chaplain there. Again, a multi-faith chaplain, and now I'm serving with London, the LIN, it's like the home care for community palliative patients, London Integrated Health Services or something, and also with St. Joseph's Hospice. So I'm very thrilled to be back in Canada, and have been back really since 2019. And I'm finding my way. And, you know, I'm not in a church setting as a leader, but I'm thrilled to participate with Awit and with Janet in the Roots and Wings website, and am a big fan of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Canada. I grew up actually United Church years ago, and I know that Canada and the US, United Church of Christ and the United Church of Canada, have the union agreement with each other, the disciples. My dog is 10 pounds and she really has me well trained, and I'm really sorry for her barking, and I'll stop talking now, except to say my question is, where do we go from here? It's been a weird year of pandemic in which, you know, I've done a lot of online Zoom. I do an online worship. I've enjoyed Janet Anstead's devotions and the Mapleton services, and also have regularly been taking in a United Church service in Fredericton at Wilmot United. So it's been a really interesting experience. So I don't know where things are going to go in Canada. I mean, in my 30, whatever it is, years of ordination, the church in size has diminished, but not necessarily in passion. So I'm very curious and supportive, and a sojourner along the way as we all brainstorm and find our way. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. And I think Stan, are you the last one? Stan, do you want to?
I could be, yeah, sure, I'll be happy to do that. Hey guys, good to be with you. I'm Stan Helton. I'm the president of Alberta Bible College. And my areas of exploration would be leaders being adaptive in their leadership. So adaptive leadership, because we're having to make not just tweaks don't work anymore. We figured that out. So we're making big leaps at times. I'm also interested in microchurch, the notion that church will probably not look as organizationally structured. One example of this is the underground church in Tampa, Florida. And along with that, is there a way for us to move our church from, this is going to sound sacrilegious, but I don't really want it to. We need to move our churches from worship to work. And what I mean by that is that worship is important, but man, do we spend a lot of time on worship and so little time in the community. And if that's not struck your pastors along the way, that they spend so much energy just for that 1 hour on Sunday, I think this is a great time for us to think this out. So glad to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, everybody. Did we miss anybody? Did everybody have a chance to introduce themselves? I think Carolyn did. Yeah. Did everybody? Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. I've taken down all of your questions and things and have distilled them into sort of 4 main categories. One that seems to come up everywhere. Well, I should say, okay, so my name is Jen. I'm in Windsor, Ontario, deep southern Ontario. And I'm the regional minister for Canada. So, and most of you know me, hopefully by now. And yeah, this is honestly, the question is always on my heart is, what is the purpose of the church? And it has been on my heart since I was a little kid, as I tried to figure out what my role in the church was and what it meant that I was involved with. And it has stayed with me my entire life. And I do believe that that question and trying to figure out what our purpose is actually will drive what comes next. I know what I hope will happen now in the next sort of 45 minutes that we have is actually to kind of take a look at, first of all, a little chunk of Acts to see what was going on there, and then to split into 2 groups and have a little short conversation, a 10-minute conversation, sort of around a theme that I'm going to suggest in a moment, and then to come back together. And this will hopefully, when we come back together, will give us an idea about where do we go next as a group for the next time that we get together. Okay. So thank you so much, first of all, because there's a ton of good questions that have come up, but I really do think that they're sort of in 4 main categories. The biggest one seems to be relationships. How do we manage relationships and do relationship with each other, with our communities, with those we've reunited with, now that we're in this different kind of scenario. And the second one is what we do and who we are, or how we are together. So now that things have changed, how is it that we go forward in the what and the how of who we are, which I think are secondary things to the why we are. The third kind of category that I, as I was listening to you speak, was around the uncertainty of change. and being uncomfortable or knowing that we are within a state of change, constant change, and that really what comes next is a mystery, because there probably are so many options ahead of us that we can kind of just pick any sort of path, and provided we do it with faith and conviction, we should be met with some measure of success, hopefully. And then I think the fourth one is around strategy. And again, I think if we dig into what our purpose is, then I think strategy comes after. And I think that one of the things I've always sort of had a problem with the church, if I'm absolutely honest, is that we focus so much on what we do that we totally miss the point about what we're called to be. And one of the things that will be coming out of Indianapolis, you may have heard it, and sorry, Terry, I totally, I'm feeling the small dog thing. Mine won't be quiet unless she's sitting on my lap. So this is Rosie, by the way. But one of the things that will be coming out of Indianapolis soon, and if you haven't heard it, is the slogan, because we're really good at slogans, is let us be the church that we say we are. And there's a lot of things that have sloughed away over the last year. Things that I had actually hoped the church would begin to drop, or at least to reevaluate. And the pandemic forced us to do those things. Got us away from our programs, got us away from our buildings, got us away from the minutia of our kind of our museum lives of being the church, and forced us into really evaluating what was it that was absolutely essential. And so the things that have sort of risen to the top have been around community, really. As I've talked to churches over the last year, it's been, how do we stay connected with each other? You know, there was a panic around how do we do worship, because that's what we know, right? And I am in agreement with those who have said, can we think more about the other things that church is supposed to be, or that is part of our purpose and our true being? What it means to be children of God, what does it mean to be a Christ follower, what does it mean to be the church, is much bigger than just worship. Worship is important, for sure, but it's bigger than that. I'd like to turn just for a moment to, and I'm going to share my screen. And you forgive me if my little dog has decided that now she wants to talk to everybody. Oh, Rosie, stop it. Her name is Rosie. Just one more. There we go. Okay, so we're just going to read a little bit from Acts 1. Sorry, just one second. Come here. Sorry about that. There's a couple of verses I always want to highlight. I chose Acts. I'm not a fan of the book of Acts personally, but I chose Acts because it gives us sort of that base. And the two, if I'm looking at the early church, and because I think that there are some really stark parallels that we can draw in the time that we are in right now, and in the time of both the book of Acts and the book of 1 Thessalonians, where the church is faced with some incredible issue, problem, challenge that it needs to figure out so that it can actually move forward and do the work that it's called to do, and to be the light, the mission, the witness to love that it's called to be. But Acts is kind of like where we're going to start. So the verses that I would like to highlight is the first couple. In the first book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus did and taught from the beginning until the day when he was taken up to heaven, after giving instructions through the Holy Spirit to the apostles whom he had chosen. And staying with them, he ordered them not to leave Jerusalem, but to wait there for the promise of the Father. This, he said, is what you have learned from me. For John baptized with water, but you'll be baptized with the Holy Spirit not many days from now. So they ask him some questions, and he responds, you're going to receive holy power from the Holy Spirit that will come upon you, and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, to the ends of the earth. And when he had said this, they were watching. He was lifted up, and the cloud took him out of their sight. And then the angels come and they tell them to, stop staring up at the heavens and get to work. So they do. They go back to, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here. This is not actually what it says. When they actually go back to Jerusalem, and When they get there, they see the other apostles and friends and women that are all devoting themselves to prayer together with Mary, the mother of Jesus, and some of his brothers. And then a few days later, Peter stands up amongst the crowd and says that the scriptures have been fulfilled, the Holy Spirit, which the Holy Spirit through David foretold. And then he goes off about Judas and some things that happened there that we know the story there. Hang on a second, someone come in. And then the story goes on about how they chose some leaders. They chose a new leader going forward. They took some time. They evaluated some people. Of course, everybody wanted to be part of the gang, and so they proposed a couple that were going to be they knew had a heart for this work, and asked for guidance and chose a new person to join the 11. That's all I'm going to kind of highlight of that, because I think what I'd like us to talk about is actually what's happening in this passage. There's a ton of stuff that just went on here. I'm going to unshare my screen. I think that there's a couple parallels that I'd like us to sit down and think about, because before we get to sort of action items, which will come in time, okay, as we talk together, is we do, I think, need to center ourselves in what it is that we are called to be. These are challenging times for the church, probably the biggest challenge that maybe arguably they've ever met. Their leader is now not amongst them physically anymore, but has promised them that the work is still to continue. So the early church has their leader's gone. Like, they've already been through a short period of him being gone, but now he's gone and is supposed to be equipping them for something better. They don't know what to do. They don't know what exactly the work is ahead of them. They just know that they've been called. But they don't wallow in that kind of uncertainty. And I think this is one of the challenges that we as a church need to keep at the forefront. We do not have the luxury of wallowing in uncertainty. We really, really don't. The work that we are called to, the presence that we are called to be in the world is urgent. They didn't wallow, they trusted, the text said, and they moved. They took the promises of Jesus, and there were three main ones there: to trust that God was still in control, that they were equipped, or that equipment was coming, the Holy Spirit was coming to help them to discern the way forward, and that they had a purpose. So three main promises there, right? To trust, to know that they were to be equipped for this, and that they had a purpose to be witnesses to the good news of Jesus Christ, the love of God, and that there was work that had already started that they were to continue. So some had, and it was interesting because there's really two main groups. There's some that had witnessed the Jesus episode firsthand. So they came with a perspective. And then on the other hand was a group that had been faithfully supporting and at home in prayer and gathering together, being in relationship with one another and prayer to try to work through, as a group, what was coming next. They also know that they need leaders for this time. They need folks dedicated to continuing on, who understand, or at least have the flexibility and resiliency to move through a challenging time. And so they gather together, they realize that the strength is in numbers, that God is with them, and that they need help with the work. So they choose a new leader to be part of the group to help them move forward. Okay, so where am I going with all this? Well, this is up to you now. That's the background. That's the text. The question I have in my mind is, are we in the same position right now? Are we in a place that that's something that I know better than to ask, non-open-ended questions, but I'm getting there. Are we in a place where we need to remember to trust that God is still in control, that we are well equipped, and that we have a purpose? Okay, that's the there really is only one answer. And that answer is yes, right? To all three of those parts. I'm just going to say that out. I'm a preacher. I can say those things. You don't have to believe me, but because I'm a disciple too, so you don't have to believe me. But this is the situation that we're in, right? So my question to you is, and we're going to split up into 2 small groups, because now there's 17 of us. So actually, we may slip into 3 groups, just so that it's a little bit more manageable. But what I'd like you to have a conversation around is, how is it? What evidence do you have that God is still at work here? How is it that we are equipped right now for what it is that we have, the task that is ahead of us? And really, what is the purpose of the church? Now, this is going to be a 10-minute conversation. So you're not going to be able to get to all of that all at once. But what I'm hoping is that groups will, in their conversation, will come up with some ideas and some thoughts on this. But how is it that we are equipped? What sorts of gifts and skills are already among us that perhaps we are, in our fear? Because let's be honest, we're afraid, right? This is uncertain. It's strange. It's just not what we know. So what is the equipment that we have? What evidence do you have that God is still at work here? That God is still has a plan, has a plan for the church, is still able to use the church, still wants to use the church for the work that God has instituted here. And what is the purpose of the church? At its heart, at its absolute heart, what does it mean to be the church? Okay? The reason I want to deal with these kinds of questions first is because I think that what they do is they get us out of that posture of fear. Okay? And into a realization that we are not alone in this. Okay? But also it gets us started with the conversation about purpose, so that whenever we do get to the parts of where God is calling us and how is God calling us, that will come out of our discussion about purpose. That's my rationale. Are there any questions? Thank you, Avi, for putting those up in the chat. Okay, we're going to randomly split up into 3 groups. We will take 10 minutes, so I'll call you back at 10 after 8. Okay, and then we'll close our time. We'll finish up with a 10-minute discussion and share some of those ideas, and then we'll go from there. Cool? Cool? Okay. I'm going to send you out into breakout rooms. Are you ready? Okay, see you in 10 minutes. You all made it back. Did we lose anybody? No. Yes, that's a first. Great. Okay, thank you very much. Let's start with, well, one of the groups. Somebody choose. What sorts of things did you come up with? You can be self-selecting here. Terry?
Oh, I think Dana took notes. It was a good discussion. We resolved all the problems of the world.
And I missed it?
Go ahead, Dana, if you don't mind.
You unplug yourself there. Unmute yourself, please.
Sorry about that. You can hear me, right? Yeah, we talked a lot. We actually kind of got fixated sort of on what's the purpose of the church. And I think we talked a lot about what the church was, in a general sense, and kind of like talked about it not being a building, but kind of the interaction and the relational things that are built up. I believe it was Terry was talking about how, one of those things that's problematical during this pandemic is sort of the natural way people kind of intermingle when we gather, the before and after service is important. So that was just sort of raised. Then the idea of what was the purpose of the church, share the message of Christ. People need Jesus in their life, and it's not enough to know about that. We talked about how, the people need to know God, love them, basically know God's grace. Terry also talked about how in hospice, people need to, have a sense that they can be reconciled, that they can find basically salvation, and it's never too late. Will God forgive them? And, it's important that we, please, someone jump in if I'm misphrasing anything or not, bringing this forward. But just this idea of reconciliation, that there is hope in God's forgiveness and that kind of thing. We also, Anne uplifted the fact that it's important. She felt that people understood the sort of the promise of Christ, and that there was life after this life. And that was an important thing to communicate. The thing that I don't think we got to, and I'm not sure that anyone would necessarily disagree, but and again, maybe because I was taking notes, and surprisingly, I was only talking half the time. I usually talk all the time. That one of the things I don't think we got to was the fact that really, to me, and none of this is contradictory, it actually feeds right into it. Learning these things and understanding these things is a way to deepen and have your life become more resonant and more sort of connected, not just to your own little pettiness, but to each other in a way that's more fluid, more formational, more informative, not just to who you are, but how the community can live and grow and share in a way. So I don't want to add too much of the stuff that I didn't add in the meeting, but that was sort of my, general take, and always has been, on the church. I tried in the last 3 seconds to have everyone yell what they were equipped with, but I got cut off right in time. So that's pretty much all we got. Did I miss anything, ladies and Noel?
Oh, good. Awesome. Thank you. The next group. Stan.
I think Mike ought to run that. He run point on that. Mike, you want to jump in and do our group?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. We talked about the second to last question and how do we know that God is still at work, and we talked about hungry people that are still looking for answers in the midst of this, and perhaps even more so because of the pandemic taking them out of control, and realizing that on a grand scale there isn't a clear path forward, might open people up to questions. And then the opportunity of technology, we've connected to different people. Stan had mentioned a Bible study group that has come together from around the world that meets and talks through different issues, somewhere at a level between small group and seminary, which was great. And so these opportunities come to us because of the technology, and that has advanced that. But then we also talked about the fact that we have people that aren't connected and don't want to be. And so that's still a big concern. So, and then we kind of summed up by saying that it's really about relationship. What is the church about? It's about relationship, echoing a lot of what Dana was saying. And so going forward, there's no going back. We're not going back to the good old days when there was no internet. And, no telephone, and you had to wash your clothes by hand and walk to school uphill both ways and all that stuff. But we're actually moving forward. And in our church, that means on-site and online. And so that we preserve the gains that we've made in terms of being able to reach out across time and space, and also be able to have people come and be part of what's going on site, and changing that language to not just in the building versus out of the building, or in the community versus out of the community, but on site and online starts to sound a lot more similar and unified, hopefully. And I think that's good. Did I miss anything, you guys? No. That's good.
Awesome, thank you. And the last group. Oh, wait.
I can share. So in our group, we tackled different questions. Some of the evidence that we thought, God is still here and at work and wants to use the church is the fact that people showed up tonight, that people are not so jaded, but they're here to like learn, to listen, to explore, and to connect with disciples across Canada. Some of the gifts and skills that we have in our congregations are people who are willing to teach. So we have people who want to teach and lead different ministries, and not always the pastor. So we have people who want to teach the kids and who want to lead Bible study. We have people who really want to go back to church, and so that desire is there, and so that's evidence. And we thought that the purpose of the church at its heart was to connect and to be in community, and not to be your own separate thing tucked away, but to be fully immersed and involved in the community. And as long as that's still a need, then there's still a need for the church. So we were lifting up a lot of different questions, and it was just kind of good. We had people from the west, kind of like central, and then the eastern part of Canada. So it was nice to hear how we're doing in our churches. So there was a lot of positivity, lots of questions, some trepidation, but I think that's church.
Right. Thank you. Is there anything else that resonated with you in your small group that wasn't mentioned? Or something that you didn't get a chance to say that you'd like to share? Terry, you're muted, Terry, if you're, yeah.
That's the famous phrase from 2020, you're muted.
Can anyone hear me?
Only to say that probably in my alternative ministries, and I don't know if Jane can attest to this or not, but in chaplaincy and spiritual care practitioner work, 2/3 of the people at least that I see are not part of a church, but are longing to know of God's love, especially at end of life or when there's health crisis. I just want to note that. So does Jesus need the church? I think we need that. I love what Awit said about the community. I think we need the community. But the other little thing that I said that wasn't mentioned that I think is important, what's come out of the pandemic for me is how short church is. I'm not getting up, getting dressed, getting to church, having potlucks, having worship, and I miss the community. But it really brings an emphasis on the fact that this is the service that I watch on Zoom, 2 or 3 different ones, but then the service here's the worship, but then the service begins all week. So it's really changed the dynamic of who we are as church. I don't know really what that means. I feel like we're wandering in the desert for like the 40 days and waiting to get to the land of milk and honey. Okay, enough.
That's good. Yeah, hopefully it doesn't last 40 years, but it's been a good year already. Oh dear. Yes, Carolyn.
I just want to say, Terry, I worked, I'm a registered nurse, and I worked for years with jails and justice and with mental health. And that's exactly what I found, that they may not have been in church, but man, they wanted to know that God loved them. They wanted to know that there was a place for them. They wanted to know, and you share that in different ways, right? Because you have to be sensitive to how where somebody is, I think. But I honestly think that that's the most important thing that I have to offer to anybody, right? That's, anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Yeah, Noel.
Just to dovetail to Terry, and we ministers have all, I mean, we ministers have always are the ones that define who and what the church is. And I think this pandemic is kind of a blessing. It's morbid as it may sound. The pandemic is defining the church for us. You know, I think this pandemic, looking at it from another perspective, is defining the church for us. And here we are being offered possibilities. Like what Stan mentioned about microchurches. I was really intrigued by that. And so, I mean, I don't have the answer myself, but I'm excited because, you know, it opens us to a lot of possibilities. And you made mention, Jen, about relationships. And I think also this would be a defining factor, relationships, and how would this kind of relationships would mutate, for lack of a better word, to define what the church is post-pandemic.
Thank you.
I recently just finished doing a calendar as a fundraiser for our church, and it's the fishermen of the South Shore, and we put some Bible verses in the calendar, and one of the Bible verses was that Jesus is with you wherever you go. Like when they're going out to fish, Jesus is with them. So you know, sometimes just giving a simple message to people and making them understand, like these fishermen don't go to church, but you know, I wanted to tell them that when they go out and they're facing danger and everything else, Jesus is with them, right?
Awesome. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I didn't want to minimize the fear stuff. I think that that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fair bit of fear around what this is going to mean in terms of you know, buildings, budgets. We talked about declining attendance, but I think that in the midst of this, there's opportunities. So instead of, you know, us being in our little corner alone and then having to spend the big money to fly to somewhere like General Assembly, or to, you know, we can do micro General Assembly like Microchurch, but you can do these kinds of things with a diversity of people more often because we can all come. We have to be mindful of people getting zoomed out and all that stuff too. But I thought that's a really great thing. So there's some opportunities there. And then I think the other thing that it's brought up is just a sheer practicality of helping people understand technology. So I love those churches that talked about your young people stepping up. But we've had, in the churches where I am, we've had our older people step up. And I'm pretty proud of some of them for actually getting on Zoom. One lady had her granddaughter come and connect her every week for a month until she learned how to do it on her tablet. So, I mean, this is kind of a warm story, but it means, like, I wonder what it's like to help people. So encouraging people to get together still in smaller microchurch idea. I think that's a really cool idea, but in their homes, inviting the people that aren't really excited about technology. But somehow we have to get people past the definition of what the church is and answer that question without including the building. Even if they don't like that idea, just for a minute, think about the church without the building. What does that mean? You can come back to having the building as a resource, but you know, the church is not the bricks and mortar of the building. And we've become very attached to that. And is that nostalgia, or is that churchianity, or is that Christianity? So that's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ed? Yeah.
Just to kind of dovetail on that, we had the building and relied very much upon it, the building. And when it became evident that we could not sustain this building, then we didn't, it was like, what are we going to do? You know, like, and we did a lot of backpedaling and trying to figure out what to do and things like this. And then I think we finally got to the point, things changed in the church, the demographic changed because of the economy, you know, you name it, a number of different things happened. And suddenly we had a board that was saying, you know what, we need to do something. Not, oh, well, we have to do what has always happened, the same old, let's go back and do this. We have to hold on to the building, it's sacred, you know, all that stuff. We didn't have that anymore. And then it kind of made it, I say easy, it hasn't been easy, but easy to say, let's get rid of this basically albatross that we have around our necks and move on and do what we're supposed to be doing. And so I'm not sure how good we're doing it or how good we will be at doing it, but I'm really encouraged by people who, I've heard this many times already, it says not going back, but moving forward. You know, we don't have to go back to what we've done. We don't have to do what we did before. Sometimes there's a lot of regrets and hurts and you name it stuff, but we don't have that anymore. You know, we need to move, we can move forward and we can do what God wants us to do because that's what we're supposed to do. So.
Thank you, Ed. Dana, did you want to share something?
Yeah, well, kind of, and again, we just kind of like keep building on what Ed just said, sort of this idea that, well, build on a couple things that everyone said. The moving forward thing I think this is like the equivalent of the Great Awakening, you know, 200 years ago with the ground shaking up in New England. You know, I think there's a real way that this kind of sent a warning shot across the bow of everyone about a lot of things, you know, food scarcity from, you know, to whatever, you know. So I think that it is a prime time. I also think it's a prime time for things to kind of go a little kooky. What I mean is one of the things, and I'm echoing what Noel said, Noah should have been around to hear more about it, with what Stan talks about the micro churches. And I often think that this is also a time for things, because what I think about the micro churches, I remember in seminary when I was being talked about the idea of where in China the churches were growing in this way because they had a lot of little house churches. But what they found is some of the theology was like, wow, like it just became, you know, and again, we're disciples, so we throw a pretty broad swath at how we can, you know, no book for the Bible, no interpretation, no creed of Christ. But this idea that what I think was needed sort of, or something that when we talk about the technology, is somehow to have some sort of a way to build these relationships, not only between these other little micro churches with technology, but also sort of help to give them some guidance. I mean, you know, there's, you know, for those of us who went to seminary, I think that we know that a lot of people in the church know more than us about church once we get out, but we also did learn a few things about how to kind of manage things not going, you know, sort of that we're all sort of playing on the same field, as it were. I have other things to say, but that's pretty much, I just sharing on top of what was said.
Thank you. Thank you. We're getting down to our last 2 minutes together. So thank you so much for the conversation. This was never intended to be a one-off kind of episode. We can't even begin, I think, to scratch the surface of where do we go next or what happens next in an hour and a half. But that being said, I'm hoping that you will, as you can, continue to join in the conversation week by week. Like I said, we'll do a 4-week thing and see what happens from there. We also have a Google group set up so that so there's a discussion board, a Google group. So if you are amenable to this, Noe will send you a request to join that group where we can continue the conversation and the questions that we have. And please feel free to post things like as you sort of mull over this conversation that we've had tonight. Think about like, what are the questions that are coming up for you? What are the things that, you know, occurred to you, you know, tomorrow morning after you've had your morning coffee that you've thought, oh, I wish I would have thought about that. So now we have a Google group that you can add your comments and we can continue on the discussion there. We're also keeping the group open so that other voices can join in as well. So these sessions are recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel so that folks can watch them and catch up so they can have some continuity in the conversation as well. So thank you for your honesty and your flexibility, your courageousness to be able to come to a admittedly half-baked idea. I think these are always the best kinds of ideas because I don't have all the answers, but I know that if we can put our brains and our hearts together, that what it is that I'm missing will come out in the spirit throughout all of us. And that I'm so appreciative, and I appreciate all of you being here and sharing your voice and your opinion. Going forward, I need some time to think about everything that you've said. If the folks that took notes today, if you can send them to me, then I will post them. Even if you just take a snapshot of it, like with your camera and send it to me, that's fine. And I will make sure that things get uploaded to the Google group so that they're there as well. But I need to hear a little bit more about what you said in your small group, so we can kind of figure out, so what is the next step as we continue this conversation. I would also like to invite you to consider where you would like to see this conversation go. So what specific, and I will post, the questions that were offered up earlier, but there may be more. Now that we've started the conversation, there will be more that comes up for you. To please post those questions in the Google group. And as we go forward, I lean heavily into spirit to kind of figure out how we do this, because anytime I put a nice clean plan into place, it just doesn't work. So I would rather just let it slide, and just see where spirit is leading us as we continue on. Any other closing thoughts, really briefly, from anyone before we say goodnight? Okay, so you'll get a notice from Noli Alfonso, who is our administrator, and he will send you the deets for the Google group, and everything. We'll post everything there. So, but if you don't have access to it, or you're having problems, if you've never used Google Groups before, get in touch with Noli. He will give you every possible instruction imaginable to get on there and contribute whenever you can. Okay, so thank you, my friends, for being here. Let's close in a word of prayer and commit our time and our week. God of love, thank you for the voices that have been around this table this evening. Thank you for not only the words that were spoken, but the quiet times when we sat and we listened. Work in our hearts and our minds. Help us to gel together these little bits and pieces of things that we've heard tonight and we've shared tonight into a vision, into a conviction about how we move toward your future and how we minister in the now that we find ourselves in. Bless our time coming. Bless our week. May everyone and our families, our friends be safe. Until we meet again, oh God, may the space between us be filled with your spirit. We ask it in your name and by your grace. Amen. Thank you, my friends. Have a good evening, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Good night.